Welcome everyone to my RC Nitro engine break-in video. In this video I'm going to do the total break-in process of getting a nitro engine ready to race tune and put on the racetrack and go racing. For this video I've got a new Nova Rossi FMS Fusion Motorsports 21 installed. Some things we'll use in this video that's pretty important. I've got an exogen temperature gun, and I'm going to be using Byron's fuel, and one real important tool will be this little heat gun here. When we first start, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to idle 2 tanks of fuel through this engine. Through the whole video, I'm going to state some very important things, and one of the most important things I truly believe is preheating of the engine. So when I get ready to start, I'm going to preheat this engine to 210 degrees before I ever try to start it. First thing I've done is most engines come out of the box, and for first initial start I try to turn the idle up some. So I've adjusted the idle screw up half a turn, and sometimes it may be a little rich even to keep running, so I've actually leaned the low side needle out on this engine 1/2 turn. And just as soon as I get it started, if I see engine temperatures rising too fast, I can go over and control this. So I've got the engine installed in the vehicle. Also, one thing I'm going to do to make my process a little easier, I've pre-primed the engine. I've got the fuel through the fuel line all the way to the carburetor. So I'm going to try the very fastest to get this engine started without having to restart or continuing trying to start it. So I'm going to try to get it to fire right up for me just as quick as I can. So we're going to preheat this engine to 210 degrees. We're then going to start it, and immediately after I get it started, what I've got here is a tennis wristband, and we're going to throw it on the engine like this here, and this is going to allow us to keep the temperature in the engine that we want. And through the first 2 tanks of the idle process, I'm going to try to keep the engine temperatures around 215 to 220 at all times, and I think that's real important, and that allows the expansion of the cylinder sleeve and eases on the engine. And also by putting the wristband on top of the engine, we'll be allowed to keep the engine real warm, but at the same time we'll have to be running a lot of fuel through there so it doesn't overheat. So this is going to flush out all the particles that the break-in procedure causes with the engine. That's going to come right out the exhaust. So we're going to be keeping the engine in the 210, 220 degree range. Same time, we're going to be running it real rich, and that's going to flush out all the particles out of our engine. Well, we've got 2 tanks of fuel idled through the engine. As you can hear in the video of it, at the end of the 2 tanks, the idle was a lot higher. The engine idle was a lot smoother. During that process, I noticed temperatures on the engine dropped a couple times. The engine, as it would loosen up a little, would start idling a little higher, and I could turn the idle back down a little bit. So through those 2 tanks, it was actually breaking in on the stand, and we wouldn't have to put a lot of pressure on the engine by putting it on the ground too early. So our next step we're getting ready to do, from this point on, we're going to now start putting it on the ground. I personally like to run my engines on pavement. It helps keeping the bearings lasting long in the chassis and the grit out of everything, but for the sake of the video, we're going to do it on grass. I'd recommend being very careful on grass. On new engines, it'll make the engine produce a lot of heat, and we don't want that. We want to warm the engine up, but not get it too hot. So we're going to preheat our engine. We're going to get it on the ground and start running it slowly. In the next 6 steps, we're going to take the engine through a process called heat cycling. We're never going to run our engine over half throttle. That's usually enough to get it up to temperature real good. If it was cool outside, I'd continue running the rest band on the head of the engine, but right now temperature's real warm, and just the simple friction of the motor is going to keep this engine plenty hot. We'll be able to continue to run the engine rich. Even though the car's moving, the friction itself produces a lot of heat inside, and we're still going to have to run rich settings to keep the engine from overheating. So our next 6 times we start this motor, we're just going to be half throttling it real easy, real smooth. One thing I like to express is I never blip the throttle during the first processes of break-in. I think it puts a lot of stress on connecting rods and crankshaft pins, so we're just going to be smooth on throttle. We're going to run about a half a tank, bringing it up to say 215, even 220 degrees is okay. We're going to shut the engine off and roll it back down to the piston, back down to bottom dead center. So let's go ahead and start this process now. So we've heat cycled this engine 6 times now, and each time we preheated the engine up to about 210, 215 degrees. Usually I run about a half a tank of fuel, getting the temperatures up good and shutting it off, and always rolling the piston down to bottom dead center. And then next time, same thing all over again. We preheat the engine up and run about a half a tank, get the temperatures up where we want them, shut it down. We'll always continue to run the engine rich. Through that time, there was a couple periods that the temperature of the engine just dropped quite a bit, so the engine started actually breaking in a little bit. Now we're pretty much ready to start doing a little bit different things with it. The engine's starting to break in somewhat, so now I'm going to start running it with the cover on it. That'll help keep the engine towards the engine during the next process and continue running things rich. We're going to start now introducing the engine to some higher RPMs. We may get it up to full RPM, but just real short bursts will take it up to what I call full RPM, which is pretty rich settings, and we'll just lower it right back down and never continue to run it there. We want the engine really fully and broke in before we ever start really stressing it real hard. So now for the next step, we're just going to start putting it on the road and running it quite a bit.